Please have your order, please. We are going today. I've spoken with the author of Senate Bill 377. They're working on a substitute that should be coming today. But so therefore, we are not going to be taking action today. Today will be a hearing only, and we will. I have, as I promised at our last meeting, I've got the sign-up sheets from the last meeting, and we will start with these. We've also got some others, new folks that signed up, and we will get to those as much as we can. As we begin, I'm going to ask Senator Halpern if you would lead us in a word of prayer. What number are you?
14. Bow our heads. Dear Lord, we gather again today to do the work for the people of this great state of Georgia. We ask you to come by here, remind us that the work that we're doing has implications, that it is important, that there are people at the other end of the legislation that we must consider. Allow us to have discernment, allow us to have discourse, and allow us to come to the best outcome for the people of this state. These things we pray in thy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. Senator Hatchett, would you like to come and just give us a brief update on Senate Bill 377, and then we will open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. I've appreciated the dialogue that we've had over the past several weeks. I've appreciated the public comment, and thank you again for giving an opportunity to hear from the public concerning the comments. I'd like to start this meeting off similar to the one that we had last, just to kind of remind those that are here to speak for or against the bill to make sure you do have an understanding of the divisive concepts that are listed. There are 9 divisive concepts that we are trying to prevent from being taught in our schools. And then also, I just want to reiterate that this bill in no way is going to prevent a teacher from teaching the facts of history. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would really want to repeat that I look forward to public comment. We are taking everything into consideration in this bill and look forward to having a good product for us before the next hearing.
Okay, and when do you expect to have that substitute?
After today's hearing and hearing the input, we're going to put a final draft together and should have it to you by the beginning. Should be tomorrow.
Okay, because on this Wednesday, I've already got 2 bills we're going to be hearing on Wednesday, and so we won't be coming back on Wednesday. But if you could, when you get that to me, so I can make sure that I get a copy of that sub to all of our committee members, so they can start looking at it before we get to our next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I'll get it to you as soon as we have it ready. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. All right. As I said at our last meeting, I'm going to go right back to this sign-up sheet that we had from last time. There might be some of you. Do we have the new sign-up sheet from today? Thank you, Matt. And if you are signed up today and I call your name on this list that I'm calling from, please let me know so that I can mark you off from signing up today. So when we get to this list, I'll know that I'm not calling the same person twice. We will begin with James Quarles. Is he here? Seeing none. Andrea Young, ACLU. Please come to the table and have a seat. And you please give us your name and who you're with.
Great, thank you all. My name is Andrea Young. I'm the executive director of the ACLU. I appreciate this opportunity to speak about the bill. We are opposed to this legislation. Whether you're white or black, Hispanic or Asian, as a parent, you want your kids to get an accurate view of history, including the ways we have not lived up to our ideals on race and inequality, including now. We are particularly troubled by the origin of the divisive concepts language. It originated in public policy with the Trump administration's Executive Order 13590, which was designed to eliminate diversity and inclusion programs in the federal government and its contractors. As a result, we really see this concept as the fruit of a poisonous tree, a tree that banned Muslims from this country and separated children from their parents at the border with Mexico. In my lifetime, Georgia has progressed from a state that divided white and black citizens through strict racial segregation to a state that could host the Centennial Olympic Games and welcome people of all races, creeds, and colors. We can't have the prosperity without the diversity. This legislation would take us backwards when we are called to move forward, to learn from the past, to create a more perfect union. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Amy Noble. Wendy Hay, Haye. Christine McKinnell. Blake Judkins. Terry Stalker. Please give your name and who you.
Okay. I am Terry Stalker. I am the parent of 3 Gwinnett County school children, live in Gwinnett County, and I am here to speak in opposition to this bill. The concepts covered in Senate Bill 377, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. The concept covered in Senate Bill 377, aside from lines 28 and 39, are all covered well by existing law and policy. Line 28 renders line 39 unenforceable. Specifically, if we prohibit teaching the current stark reality of systemic and institutional racism, which is what line 28 prohibits, as a fundamental part of who we are now as a state and as a country, we are denying people of color their own reality and thereby causing them untold anguish and psychological distress. Of particular concern to some on the right is the term systemic racism, often wrongly interpreted as an accusation that everyone in the system is racist. In fact, systemic racism means almost the opposite. It means we have systems and institutions that produce racially disparate outcomes, regardless of the intentions of the people who work within them. The consequences of systemic racism are vast. The burgeoning racial wealth gap, political disenfranchisement, mass incarceration, and racist immigration policies, to microaggressions, racial profiling, racist media imagery, and disparities in health, education, employment, and housing. As one example that I'll share, a heartbreaking example of systemic racism that exists today is that health outcomes for Black women are dismal compared to those with their white counterparts. A Department of Health and Human Services study reported that a baby is more than twice as likely to die during childbirth if the birth mother is Black. To say that we cannot teach that this country is systemically and fundamentally racist, as the bill is currently written, would be to say that we cannot talk about these current realities of systemic racism. And I find that unacceptable, and as such, I'm standing in opposition to this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Cole Musio.
We spoke last time.
Okay. Noel, it was like Kahn. A-I-A-N. Next we have Carrie Luke. Is that Luke? Rhonda Thomas. Jennifer Cesco.
Hi,
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm Jennifer Sesco. I'm an elementary school counselor. As a school counselor, I'm here to advocate for students by asking you to oppose Senate Bill 377. School counselors have ethical standards we must follow, which include ensuring that all students feel affirmed at school. We have an entire ethical position statement on the school counselor and anti-racist practices. We cannot adhere to our obligations if we are forbidden to address issues around identity, which includes race. We are often called on to respond to bullying when students use racial slurs or other identity-based insults. Helping repair school climate in those instances requires teaching about racism and how to combat it. No part of any theory or research I use involves making white students feel badly about themselves. We do practice empathy and being an upstander, speaking out against unfair treatment of others. Hundreds of students and educators and parents are telling you that this bill is unfair. It invalidates the lived experiences of marginalized students and denies all students a truthful education. The vague complaint process in the bill will instill fear and cause good educators to avoid important subjects. And that's no matter what it says. This is how it will play out on the ground. We must address race and racism without fearing penalty. One reason among many is that the suicide rate of Black elementary schoolers is increasing faster than that of any racial group, with Black kids under 13 being twice as likely to die by suicide as their white counterparts. Race-based bullying and race-based trauma have been shown as contributing. Solving such a crisis involves proactive programming to ensure that schools have inclusion and anti-racism as a foundation. At a time when you all say, which is true, that much needed focus is on mental health, I respectfully ask that you consider the negative impacts of how this bill will play out and oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel Otero. Eden Mew, M-E-W. Alex Ames. Nita Merchant. James Wilson.
He's on his way. I think he had class.
I'm sorry?
He had class. He's coming to the state, so he may.
Okay, we'll try to come back to him if we have time. Camden Hughes. Jonna Johnson Davis. Penny Poole. Richard Rose. Randy Allison. Terrence Wilson. Anthony Downer. Kevin Cochin. Jacqueline, I'm sorry. Jocelyn. Giovanni Serrano. Justin Pauley. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just have a seat and please announce your name and who you're with.
Good afternoon. I'm Justin Pauley with the Georgia School Boards Association. Just want to say thank you for allowing me to speak today, and wanted to address Senate Bill 377. This bill seems to be trying to strike a balance between prohibiting concepts considered divisive and eliminating critical thinking and curricula that intersect with these concepts. That's a difficult task. We already have numerous laws, rules, and regulations at the state and federal level dealing with discrimination, academic standards, and requirements for professional personnel. Legislation cannot change individual beliefs or values, but it can stifle discussion of our complex history, whether it intends to or not. We appreciate the inclusion of the things this bill is not to be construed to prohibit, but we do not believe it will at all temper accusations occurring. No matter how well a teacher or other official responds, there are likely to be complaints that one or more of the divisive concepts were taught, acted upon, promoted, or encouraged. Then we are in a he said, she said situation with no amount appealing to settle it. We have had the opportunity to speak with Senator Hatchett, and we appreciate the opportunity to provide feedback on the bill, and we just look forward to continuing the conversation as we work through the process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Margaret Cicerelli.
Mr. Chairman, Margaret's not able to be here today, but she sent me the board remarks, if that's okay.
That'll be fine. Please come up forward. You're with Paige.
Yes, sir.
Just please let us know your name and who you're with.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Josh Stevens. I'm with the Professional Association of Georgia Educators. We're the largest educator organization representing around 93,000 educators that serve in a variety of roles across Georgia, but mainly they're classroom teachers. We appreciate the opportunity to provide this feedback on Senate Bill 377. I'll preface my remarks first to say that we share your desire for transparency in school practices and underscore our shared commitment to ensure parents are both aware of what's happening in their children's schools and have meaningful opportunity for feedback. That being said, we do have concerns about this legislation, and we do oppose it as it's currently written. Before we pass legislation which could lead to the loss of funding, a financial penalty which could do real harm to students and classroom teachers, we need a better idea of current practices in actual Georgia classrooms. Are there indicators that districts are not following OCGA 20-2-1017, which requires districts to create a process for public review and comment on instructional materials? Are parents aware of these requirements, and are they providing feedback to their schools? If so, is that feedback actually being acted upon by schools? Second, does this proposed legislation give educators the information they need to confidently serve students and their families? Do the prohibited teachings conflict with the items specifically allowed to be taught, or would they lead to a chilling effect on teaching the allowed items? Parents, students, and educators should be brought together to discuss what is and what is not working with current local district curriculum transparency practices before putting a policy into state law. Third, is the complaint mechanism feasible for local schools and the State Board of Education to actually administer? We respectfully ask you to think carefully about these considerations before passing this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeley Harsh, Harsch.
Yeah.
Can you please give us your name and?
I will. Thank you.
Sorry for that.
So my name is Cecily Harsh-Cann, and I'm here on behalf of Public Education Matters Georgia Action Fund. So thank you. So Article 8 of the Georgia Constitution states that the provision of an adequate public education shall be a primary obligation of the state of Georgia. We meet that obligation through our quality basic education funding formula, which is determined by enrollment, grade level, and programs, as you all know. This is a funding guaranteed to each school district each year for our students. To arbitrarily withhold up to $870 million to school systems across the state for teaching concepts deemed divisive by our state legislature, bypassing local communities and school boards is grossly detrimental to our students, is unconscionable, and flies in the face of our constitutional obligation. Furthermore, the process you have set up is fatally flawed, and that's been spoken about some, to allow members of the House and Senate Education Committee to bring complaints about any classroom in any school district in the state not only sets up a logistical nightmare scenario, but flies in the face of local control. After 2 years of teaching and learning through a pandemic and decades of austerity cuts, underfunding, there is much the state legislature could be doing to assist our public schools. We need more counselors. We need more nurses, social workers, more professional development, more money for pupil transportation, even more. We need our teachers not to have to pay for classroom supplies out of their own pockets. We need to provide schools with additional funding for students living in poverty. Georgia is one of only 6 states that does not do that. Moreover, the ramifications of this bill for higher ed are enormous, and in turn for K-12. This bill explicitly threatens scholarship funding and thus Georgia's ability to retain its best and brightest, which Hope has been so effective in allowing us to do. Bills like SB 377 that stifle teachers and cut off a free, robust, and so very necessary discussion of history and current events are morally wrong, could have a very harmful impact, and are a major distraction from the important needs the legislature should be focusing on to assist our public schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, I think that's everyone from last week's sign-up sheet, so now we will move to this week's sign-up sheet. Next, we have Lisa Morgan, Georgia Association of Educators.
Good afternoon. I am Lisa Morgan. I'm the current president of the Georgia Association of Educators, but I am also a classroom teacher of 23 years in the public schools in Georgia. And that's what I want you to think about when you're thinking about this bill. Your view is as a legislator. My view is as a classroom teacher. And many times we understand that you have intentions to improve things in our classrooms. But many times those intentions, when they finally trickle into the door of my classroom, become something much different. And that is our concern with this bill. First, it seems to say that we don't trust our teachers in Georgia to follow what the curriculum, the Georgia Standards of Excellence, which is what we are supposed to be teaching. It also, besides the chilling effect on what will be taught in the classroom, once again turns the relationship between parent and educator into an adversarial one. Will the teacher who had planned to use literature discussing Plessy versus Ferguson to teach argumentative essays be told, you might want to find a different essay to teach that standard about how to construct an argumentative essay? It's not so much the actual history lessons that will be changed. It's all the other lessons that interweave history and the concepts of our country, the racism we've experienced, the civil rights movement, that will be rethought and have this serious chilling effect. What happens when the teacher down the hall files a complaint against another teacher? I can tell you, as an educator, we want only the best from our colleagues. But how is that relationship going to be healed? When the Attorney General members of the House Education Committee, and you as members of the Senate Education and Youth Committee file a complaint, what will happen? Is the principal, or all principals, going to be strong enough to say, no, the teacher did not teach something they weren't supposed to? Or are they going to feel political pressure to substantiate the complaint? This will put a burden on our administrators. And our administrators are already working as many hours as teachers to ensure that things are running smoothly in their buildings. This bill and so many others this session feel like an attack on public educators. My colleague who teaches in Fulton County said at the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020, the public viewed teachers as superheroes. And now 2 years later, we feel like the public views us as super zeros. Please don't continue this attack on our educators. Defeat this bill, and let's talk about what we can do to improve public education for all our students in all our classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you. Abby. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I'm afraid I would have
You
missed
have to be careful, there's no C there.
it.
You'll be in a lot of trouble. So, my name is Abby Fuchsman, and
No,
spelled
everybody laughs 'cause everybody-
F-U-K-S-M-A-N. That is how I usually decided by my electives if the professor couldn't pronounce it right. And I have been a resident of Fulton County for 23 years now, which is amazing. And I'm here as a constituent who is living in Fulton County, but I'm also lovingly able to represent the Jewish Community Relations Council, where I am a board member. Without education, we have ignorance, and ignorance is at the root of all hate. We must always educate our children on the evil of hate, and these words were my father's, said many times. This type of legislation is intended to shield Georgia students from uncomfortable conversations. But history, by its nature, is uncomfortable. It's filled with people being wronged by others. When the government tries to erase history because it's uncomfortable for students to hear, human atrocities, slavery, the Holocaust, we prevent our students from learning true historical context. History isn't pretty. We all need to recognize that, especially for students learning about their own country. We are nearing a slippery slope that can ultimately prevent our children from learning certain truths, especially when it comes to teaching the Holocaust. Nelson Mandela said, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate." Only through teaching the whole history can students fully understand this. History requires context, the good, the bad, and yes, the ugly. How is it that every year Germany teaches its children the atrocities of the Holocaust? How is that? These children aren't living or walking around in a way that they're not capable of dealing with life. That's what they're taught. They're taught about the things that their own country did. Are German children less sensitive than ours? The Germans understand that we hinder an individual from grappling with the past truths. We endanger their future. I want to share a personal story. Both my parents were Holocaust survivors. My father was one of the first to speak about his Holocaust experience to public school students and was a visiting professor at Tulane every year in New Orleans in the 70s. He wanted to educate people on what hate could lead to. And as he said, His survival gave him the right to use that voice that he was denied in Poland, and he transferred that understanding of the hate that he had experienced into another fight, the fight against racial injustices. Hate in Europe was no different than the hate we see today on our own soil, he told me. I share this story to bring home a point. History without full context is dangerous. It can lead to rot, accounting for the toll of the unchecked hate. Without true education, we have ignorance, and ignorance is at the root of all hate. We must always educate our children on the evil of hate. These words were my father's, and I implore this committee to not pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Cicely.
I already spoke. I signed up again.
Oh, okay. Jennifer Cesco. Terry Stalker. Okay. Just making sure. Leslie Anderson.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for letting me speak to you all today. My name is Leslie Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Atlanta, and you just heard from my board member, Abby Fuchs. She really is way more eloquent than I am, so I'm really just here to share some additional information in regards to the Jewish community and kind of our take on it. JCRC of Atlanta, for those of you who don't know, we are an independent 501c3 organization that does have an independent board, but we do serve as a convener for the Jewish community and try to bring them together to discuss these issues. One of our goals is to develop civil conversation and consensus within these contexts. And one thing I will tell you about the Jewish community is that they are very adamant about the ability to learn, the ability to debate, and the ability to disagree, and is written even into our Talmud and into our Mishnah, into not only our religion, but into our culture. And for any of it, we have a personal joke among ourselves, which I can tell because I'm Jewish, which is we like to say, 2 Jews in a room, 3 opinions. So it is not unusual for Jews to have an understanding of what it means to talk about difficult things. Jews for over 2,000 years have experienced prejudice and hate and have been pushed out of different places in every country that they've lived in. That even now, when we talk about history right now, it's not just about then, it's about now. Every Passover, Jews sit at a table, whether they're religious or not, and we have our Passover meal and we say, that it's happening right now, that we left Egypt, we are leaving Egypt, it is now. When we talk about the Torah and the giving of the Torah, it's not about what happened 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. What does this mean to us right now, and how do we live as Jews now? And what that means in terms of our ethics, in terms of what is important, in terms of how we're teaching our children. So we are opposed to this bill. Not because we are not opposed to the thought in terms of the desire to protect children. We absolutely want to protect children. And however, we don't believe that the method by which this bill suggests will do that. If anything, we feel like it will do our children a disservice by not giving the information they need to make the decisions that are in their best interest in terms of how to make those choices and how to weigh the information. If children don't have, and I know that 377 also moves into the higher education area, and that is of particular concern, because I feel like that is a time when young adults have the opportunity to really expand their own thinking regardless of where they come from or what their original upbringing is or how their parents feel, and to develop their own ways of thinking and being critical in how they go about doing that. Most of the time, that gives them the opportunity to weigh things. And so that's what I would offer, is that this bill, as it's written, does not offer enough room for people to weigh the information necessary to make the right decisions to fit within their own understanding of the world and how they're going to be as they move out into the broader community. So thank you.
Thank you. Cindy Battles. Hello.
Hey, good afternoon. How are y'all?
Just fine.
Thank you. My name is Cindy Battles, and I am with the Director of Policy and Engagement with the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. And I am a product of Georgia schools. Some of y'all are thinking, oh my God, now we really need this bill. Let me, I don't know.
Just
if
for
this-
the record, I think
Sorry, I
the
cracked
majority of
myself
us up here at this board are a product of
I
Georgia
feel
schools.
like more people in this room know me than I thought. I'm sorry. So I grew up in Jones County, Gray, Georgia. If you know anything about Gray, Georgia, you know that every single spring we have Confederate Memorial Days. By the way, the battle that they reenact is not the real battle. It's the battle that happened 3 days later because we lost the battle in Gray, Georgia. Like Sherman burnt Clinton. There's a whole tour that you can take. But I grew up in Gray, Georgia. I went to Maggie Califf Middle School in 8th grade. It was a requirement that we take Georgia history. My coach, Coach Pitts, was a black man, and I remember him teaching me this class. I also remember going home and explaining to my grandma that the vice president of the Confederate States of America was from Georgia, and he was a hero. His name was Alexander H. Stephens. You know what I wasn't taught? I wasn't taught a single thing about his cornerstone speech. I want to ask you what it was like for my coach to have to teach me that a man who gave the cornerstone speech was a hero. And if you think that that's divisive. Now you think that it would get better because I did go to college. Actually, I'm still in college because I decided to go back, which was really the smartest thing I've ever done in my whole life, sometimes. My first semester, because I have an associate's degree in early childhood education and development, which I should probably be using right now instead of telling stories. But my first semester back, I took a poli-sci class, and my political science book was written by a professor from North Georgia, a white man. He described the Civil War as an unfortunate incident that tested the powers between state and federal governments. Still a fact, right? But what does it leave out? What are we missing if we're only teaching our children certain facts? A good number of people in this room and who plan to vote for this bill, when we were talking about protecting Confederate memorials and we said that they were divisive, told us we couldn't erase history. But what we are doing with this bill is erasing history. We were taught history so we didn't repeat it. If we're not going to repeat history, we have to be uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be divisive, but I've never, this divisive thing, I don't see. I see discomfort. I deserve to be uncomfortable. I deserve to be uncomfortable so we don't make the same mistakes again. Y'all, my aunt is, we're not going to say her age because she might be watching. But she is a retired magistrate judge in Jones County. And the 22nd was the 10-year anniversary of my father's passing. And I called her, and she had just watched on the news that we had passed one of these bills, and she could not even believe it. So when I told her I was going to testify here, she told me to give y'all a message. Now understand, I come from a redneck family, so this is paraphrased. It is not a direct quote because I don't want to lose my job. She said, don't be silly. Our history happened. It is a scar. But it is one that we have to teach, and then we move on. I'm asking you, my aunt, who, by the way, still wonders how she raised a raging liberal like her niece, she's asking you, don't pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Told me you were a liberal before.
Is it a shot? Hey, do I have to get a candy bag?
Next, we have Catherine Maddox. Is it Maddox or Maddox?
It's Maddox, like the baseball player. Good afternoon, Chairman.
But if you'll please repeat your name and who you're with.
Oh, yeah, I have that written in my next sentence. My name's Catherine Maddox. I'm a Fulton County resident and a graduate of Georgia State University. I'm very glad for the opportunity to share with you from the education that still shapes the decisions I make on a daily basis. My degree is in journalism and women's studies, and I have no problem admitting that I chose women's studies initially because I thought it would be an easy A. After all, I was a woman and therefore knew everything there was about being one. Or so I presumed, very wrongly. That was the year that Trayvon Martin was murdered, and in one of my classes we read Audre Lorde's words. Some problems we share as women. Sorry. Some we do not. You fear your children will grow up to join the patriarchy and testify against you. We fear our children will be dragged from a car and shot down in the streets, and you will turn your backs on the reason that they are dying. I thought of my friends' children and feared for them for perhaps the first time. Certainly this was not the first time my friends had felt that fear. I've never been a bigot, but white privilege blinded me from the experience of other members of my community and my loved ones for many years. And so you see, it is not our education, but rather the delusion of white supremacy which divides us. Education is the path back to reality, however difficult that reality may be. An area of scholarship that I studied and believe could be helpful to the committee and to the legislature at large is that of trauma studies. Included in this scholarship is a book by Jennifer Griffiths called Traumatic Possessions, in which she offers a story on a concept that I believe is necessary for this nation to move forward, yet one that stands under attack by this proposed legislation. That concept is that white people have become so accustomed to the pain of people of color that they fail to see it, even when it is presented before them. One of the many examples of this historical and modern day occurrence that Griffiths shares is the experience of the all-white jury presiding over the trial of police officers who had beaten Rodney King. When being shown the footage of the cops brutalizing King, all but one of the jurors were unable to hear that King was crying out in pain. And it wasn't until his aunt pleaded, "Can't you hear him hollering?" that the audio was rolled without the video, that the jury could hear his cries. The implications of this are that none of us have the right to become accustomed to the pain of another person or group of people knowingly or unknowingly, and yet this seems to be exactly what has occurred, and not only in Georgia, but the United States of America. I have listened as members of the committee make light of the racism that still exists in our society by asserting that it is mainly a relic of the past, and that if anything, we still have a few things to work on, whatever that means. During the first committee hearing, myself and others sat in shock as the author of this bill refused to acknowledge that the Jim Crow legislators were racist when asked directly. In doing so, that committee member was continuing the same troubling legacy of the former governor, Carl Sanders, who wrote in a letter to President Johnson in 1965, calling the Voting Rights Act unnecessary, despite the multiple policy tactics Georgia was using at the time to disenfranchise black voters, including literacy tests, poll taxes, all-white primaries, and outright expelling black people from political office. But Georgia's racist history does not end there. In 1981, the chair of the Georgia House Appropriations Committee was still referring to black people using racial slurs. In 1987, Hosea Williams had to face down armed white supremacists in Forsyth County. And here we are in the present day, in the midst of a global pandemic, as well as a public safety crisis disproportionately affecting people of color. And instead of bearing witness to those most affected by these issues and seeking out experts and scholars to better understand the various crises at hand, we are creating laws that forbid even speaking about them meaningfully and contextually. I would urge the authors of this bill to research experts in racial trauma, such as Griffiths, before putting any more effort into this bill, and to read what she says about the importance of bearing witness to another's pain and how necessary that act of bearing witness is for healing to take place. Griffiths writes, bearing witness to the suffering of another involves exposing oneself and one's potential as victim, perpetrator, or accomplice. A kind of false witness occurs whenever the listener thwarts the creation of testimony to avoid its painful truths. Let us not be neglectful students of history by continuing to play whack-a-mole with pressing issues only for them to pop up back down the road and yet some other sinister iteration. How can we expect children to understand or to cope in today's society if we hide from them the foundation of its persistent ills? Should adults choose that we have no responsibility to our own community, neither the need to recognize the systemic racism within it, nor the need to dismantle our own bogus white privilege, then let that be between ourselves and our own integrity. But as legislators, you do not have the option to abdicate from your obligation to your community. You have a unique responsibility to uphold the truth, just as students have the right to learn about it. This bill is a blatant attempt at indoctrination, and I strongly oppose it. And I have the concepts pulled up here, and I can go through the list of all of the ones that I'm opposed, but it's most of them. And then I'm also just opposed to the bill as a whole because I really just think that it's troubling that a group of all white legislators are trying to legislate a bill about limiting how we can talk about racism in this country. And that's all. Thank you so much. I also emailed all of you guys this email, so all of the historical things and the citations, if you want to look those up, are in the email cited.
Right.
So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we have Tyler Coward. I don't know how to pronounce that name.
You had it right the first time.
Okay. If you'll just tell us who you're with, your name and who you're with.
Of course. My name is Tyler Coward, C-O-W-A-R-D, with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE. FIRE is a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the free speech and due process rights of students and faculty members at institutions of higher education. And because our mission is limited to higher education, that's what I'm going to be focusing my testimony on today. And because free speech is either guaranteed to everyone or to no one, FIRE has fought censorship of students and faculty from all parts of the political spectrum. We help defend students and faculty that are on the left, that are on the right. Recently, we were called to action at Rutgers University because the Student Bar Association at the law school at Rutgers University Law told student organizations that they would only allow student funds to be used for programming that created that they would only fund student events that were held through the lens of critical race theory, diversity, and inclusion. So in that instance, we helped the student group say no. Well, we have a right to speak out and use student fee funds the way that we see fit. We've also been involved in Georgia in the past. We've had litigation here in Georgia on behalf of Hayden Barnes at Valdosta State University. We supported Alliance Defending Freedom's litigation through an amicus brief to the Supreme Court recently at Gwinnett College University. This is all to say that, and we've even been here in the past few years supporting the Forum Act, the bill that would grant free speech rights for students on college campuses, or better protect these rights on college campuses. And all I have to say is that we really are nonpartisan, and we are here to oppose this bill because of its application to higher education and because it runs in the face of 65 years of Supreme Court case law that protects academic freedom of professors in higher education. I could go through all the cases for you. 1957, Sweezy versus New Hampshire. A plurality of the Supreme Court of the United States explained why defending academic freedom is so important. And a very short quote of a very big block quote is that teachers and students must always remain free to inquire, to study, and to evaluate, to gain new maturity and understanding. Otherwise, our civilization will stagnate and die. And a decade later, in 1967, in Kieshin versus Board of Regents, The court further enshrined the need to protect academic freedom from governmental interference when it identified academic freedom as, and this is a quote, a special concern of the First Amendment, which does not tolerate laws that cast a pall of orthodoxy over the classroom. And the court grounded this strong protection of academic freedom in higher education to this notion that the classroom on college campuses is peculiarly the marketplace of ideas. And our nation is deeply committed to safeguarding academic freedom, which is of transcendent value to all of us and not just to the teachers involved. 5 years later, in 1972, in a case called Healy versus James, the court considered a First Amendment claim from a student group, Students for a Democratic Society, which was a leftist group at the time. I don't know if they still exist today or not. But the Central Connecticut State University prohibited this organization from being a student organization on campus. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court said that state colleges and universities are not enclaves immune from the sweep of the First Amendment, and declared the protection of free speech nowhere more vital than in the community of American schools. And so I say this, that there are some issues with this bill, particularly with how it is applied to the classroom setting and higher education. It does conflict directly with 65 years of Supreme Court case law. There are some things that the state can do in this space. They can, for example, or you all as legislators can, for example, limit what administrators do at institutions of higher, at the administrators at these institutions. They are, employees of the state, and the government can, in some instances, restrict speech of employees of the state. Faculty members generally aren't considered. They at least have this strong academic freedom exception to these rules. So censorship of faculty in the classroom is almost never allowed. And I'm sorry, did you say something? No. Oh, I'm very sorry. And one final thing is that there are some other states have considered these bills. What some of them have done is saying that institutions and faculty cannot compel an individual to express belief in any of these concepts. That goes back to the 1940s in the Barnett case, where the students refused to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance because they were Jehovah's Witnesses and they did not want to show allegiance to anything other than God. And that case went to the Supreme Court after the students were suspended and said, you can't come back until you do this. The Supreme Court said, no, you cannot compel these people to express belief. So that's one thing this committee could do, is to prevent this compelled speech. And one thing is that some of these concepts may be vague, may be overbroad. There may be challenges, aside from just facial challenges, the unconstitutionality, as applied challenges under the vagueness doctrine. So I would advise both the sponsor and the committee to be concerned about that as well. And finally, we are not blind to some of the things that have happened in education across the country. There are instances of where there is actually discriminatory conduct that has happened in class. Some of these tend to happen in K-12 spaces, mostly because that's where most students are in the country. You see examples or hear examples of teachers lining up students by skin color and by skin tone and asking the lighter-skinned students to apologize to darker-skinned students for their oppression. I think that most courts would find that to be, most people find that to be disagreeable, offensive. A lot of courts would find that to be violating existing civil rights law, and I think that is important, an important tool in this context as well, that existing civil rights law and civil rights protections may be good enough to allow, or exist to allow courts to examine the factual scenario and take everything on a case-by-case basis instead of broad, sort of overly burdensome bans on speech. And that is generally a better approach, and one that we've relied on for decades now, at least in the anti-discrimination realm. That's all I have in terms of prepared remarks. I look forward to any questions you have now. I don't know how the process works today, Mr. Chair. But
okay, there's no questions, but I appreciate you being here today, and
thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, sir. Next, we have Taylor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Just want to be real brief in my comments. My name is Taylor Hawkins, and I am from Frontline Policy Action. I want to move us a little from some of the testimonies that have been heard, which is, in my opinion, and having read the bill very thoroughly multiple times, the emotions around what has been hyped about the bill versus the facts of the bill. So I want to mention briefly 3 things that this bill does not do, and then this 3 things that the bill does do. This bill does not, number one, most importantly perhaps, this bill does not erase any history, and this bill does not ban any discussion of U.S. history. If it happened in our history, it happened in the United States, you can talk about it, you can teach it. If it's a historical fact, this bill does not restrict it. And I can refer you to the specific sections if necessary. It's specifically spelled out as well as being evident in the way the restrictions are worded themselves. Secondly, this bill does not ban the discussion of racist movements or racist individuals in U.S. history. If it's an anti-Semitic event or individual, you can talk about it. If it's a white supremacist individual or event, you can talk about it. You can have robust and thorough conversation around history in the United States, and I think that those things should be talked about in a very robust manner and discussed for our kids, and that is something that this bill does not ban. Thirdly, this bill does not inherently marginalize any minority. This bill makes sure that no minority feels attacked, either directly or indirectly through the teaching of specific racist, divisive concepts. And then 3 things this bill does do. Important things, I think. This bill prevents students from being disadvantaged by people who would teach them that such important character traits as meritocracy and other things such as a hard work ethic. Prevents them from being taught that those things are a tool of any one particular group to use against another group. These are things that are incredibly important to understand and to inculcate as part of one's personal value structure to achieve success in later life, and our children should never be limited in their thinking by misuse of history in this manner. A second thing this bill does do is it restricts the active teaching of racism, of racial supremacy and divisive concepts. It doesn't restrict the teaching of the history of that. It does restrict you being racist in the classroom as a teacher. It restricts you from saying that because of our history, therefore, children in this classroom should feel disadvantaged or should feel bad because of the actions of past individuals. And then finally, this bill does restrict racism regardless of what premise that racism springs. So this is not something that's trying to cloak the history of this country, whether white supremacists in our history or otherwise. This bill restricts racism of all formats from being objectively taught by teachers as a active good. That's anti-Semitism, white supremacist content, any form of racism. If you're teaching that children should feel bad about that or about things that have happened in our past, then those racialized divisive concepts are banned by this bill. We should be protecting our students not from the history of our nation, which can and should be taught, even under this bill, but we are protecting our students from the divisive and racially motivated concepts. I'm happy to restate that this bill does not restrict any robust teaching of U.S. history, and we ask that you would vote do pass on Senate Bill 377. We thank the Senator for bringing this important piece of legislation, and we look forward to seeing it on the floor.
Thanks, sir. All right. So I have gotten through all the sign-up sheets. I just thank everybody for being cordial today and letting us have let everyone be heard. I think that's important because we're not, we're trying to do this in the right way that everybody gets the opportunity to have input, but at the same time, the end product is we come out with the best piece of legislation, if there's a need for legislation, that we can possibly present. So not having any further business on the committee today. Yes, ma'am.
I was on the list for last week and I didn't have my name called.
What was your name again?
Audra, right?
You were the one that somebody said was somebody was.
No, my name is Audra Grace. I didn't hear my name called on the sheet that was for the last hearing.
Well, you're welcome to come up, but you're not on the sign-up sheet, and that's.
Today, for sure, but I should have been on the last one.
Go ahead and come up. You're welcome to come up.
Thank you for taking the opportunity to hear me today. My name is Audra Grace. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Georgia. Is that better?
Yes.
Super. Thank you. I am coming to speak today in opposition to this bill as a licensed professional counselor. There's been many arguments today that have spoken on the damage that this would do, and I don't seek to say that I could more eloquently define what kind of damage this could do, but I'll give my perspective on trauma. Children need to know the truth. They need to know the truth in whole. They need to know it crucially with the statement from their loved ones, their teachers, their parents, that we have worked our hardest as the people who care about them, that this will never happen again. We had the opportunity after slavery to say this will never happen again. We botched it, and therefore we had Jim Crow. We had the opportunity after Jim Crow to say never again. We botched it. And now we have mass incarceration, and we have racialized police. You have an opportunity here today. You have an opportunity to turn the tide and say, table this, take line A, 27, table the rest, go look up Miss Jane Elliott, study up. She's got an hour-long PBS special called A Class Divided. Watch it in whole. Call her and say, I need help writing programming, writing policy, and writing curriculum so that my children will not have to be part of this experience, and they will not be traumatized by what it is that they didn't get to know their history as a white person, or they don't have to experience further pain and humiliation as people of color. I appreciate your time today. Thank you, committee.
Thank you. All right, now having no one else to sign up, thank you for being here today. We will have no further business for this committee. We will stand adjourned.